Okay, well, I want to move on to one other subject, and that is, I know I promised that all of the techniques that we were going to talk about are just as useful for monogamous relationships as poly relationships, but there are a couple of specific techniques, specific communication problems and challenges that come up in open relationships, and I'd like to spend about 10 minutes talking about that, and then we're going to close and have question and answer. So for those of you to whom this may seem irrelevant, there actually is some useful information for people, even if you are in a monogamous relationship. You probably can learn something from this short phrase. I am going to, or this short period, I'm going to hand out a second set of handouts, and these are specifically for people who are in polyamorous relationships and dealing with communication issues, and you're welcome to take them whether you are in that situation or not. The first thing I want to say about it is that there are 4 key things that are really important in polyamorous communication situations. And there are 4 key things that they're also important in monogamous relationships, but even more so in an open relationship. Because in a monogamous relationship, you have to have great communication skills to make it work, but you can also get by on some shared assumptions and on being involved in a more traditional type of relationship that has a little more societal support and underpinnings. Whereas with people who are in open relationships, there are so many different types of open relationships with so many different sets of rules that people who are in an open relationship cannot really slide on any kind of shared assumptions, any kind of shared values or rules. Everything really has to be discussed explicitly and upfront. Whereas when you fall in love in a monogamous relationship, there's kind of a rule book that most people are kind of going by, and it might not be exactly the same for everybody, but you kind of can get by on just some of those basic shared assumptions. That is not true at all in an open relationship, because you probably have a very different idea of how it should go and what the rules should be. I often tell people that these are the 4 ridiculously obvious communication basics in a polyamorous relationship. Number 1, listen carefully to what your partner says, as well as to their nonverbal communications and their actions. Number 2, don't lie. Whatever you do, don't lie. If you can't tell the truth, then just say you don't want to talk about it, or you're not ready to talk about it, or whatever. Don't lie. The third is meta-communicate, what I described before with the 5 goals of communication, to meta-communicate about what it is that you are trying to communicate before you actually deliver that communication. What is the goal? And then 4th, know what you need and want, and be willing to assert that clearly to your partner. The 4th one may be the hardest for a lot of us, because we don't always know exactly what it is we want and need. But the more you actually can figure that out and present it clearly to your partner, the better. Especially because, as I mentioned, with open relationships, there are so many different types and so many different sets of rules. The more you can know yourself what you need and want, and the more you're willing to be brave enough to state that explicitly and know what your own boundaries are, the more likely this relationship is going to be successful. I wanted to reiterate that first ridiculously obvious communication basic in a poly relationship, which is listen carefully to what your partner says, their nonverbal communication, as well as their actions. The nonverbal communication and their actions are particularly important in an open relationship. There's an awful lot of pressure on both partners to kind of stretch themselves and stretch their limits and to go along with things that maybe they're not totally comfortable with. And so often people make the mistake of thinking, well, I really should be kind of a good sport about this, or my partner really wants this other relationship, or my partner really wants to go forward in this relationship with someone else. And there's a lot of pressure to go along with things when in fact you may not be quite ready for whatever the specific thing is that your partner is asking you. So often what happens is someone will say yes to something or say it's okay, but it's not. And if you're paying attention to their body language and to how they actually are behaving, you'll be able to grasp that this is really not okay with them and needs more discussion. If they are becoming sullen and withdrawn after this conversation, then you probably need to go back and talk about it some more, rather than think, well, they said yes, they said okay, so we can move forward. So that is a really big issue in open relationships, that oftentimes you're being asked to do something a little more than you're ready for, and it's a lot more trouble to go ahead and do something and then have to repair it later than to just say, okay, let's wait, let's talk this through a little bit more. I want to also reiterate about the not lying part. It's very, very tempting in an open relationship. There are moments when you will be tempted to tell lies, just because we do not have any training for sitting down with our partner and saying, I'm having sex with someone else, or I'm in love with someone else, or we really don't have any experience with that, and that's a skill set that is hard to learn. And so there's a great temptation in those situations to lie or fudge the truth quite a bit. And so I often tell people, if you are feeling a tendency that you're about to lie, to try to stop yourself and say, whoa, wait a minute, I'm just not ready to talk about this, or to say, I'm afraid I might lie about this, so let's not talk about it right now, let me have a little more time. Or if you have told a lie, which I don't know anyone in any polyamorous relationship who hasn't at some point either accidentally or deliberately kind of fudged the truth or lied, and you're embarrassed immediately and say, oh God, how did I do that? As soon as you realize you've made a mistake, or as soon as you can muster the courage, you've got to go back and correct it and say, I said something that wasn't exactly true, and I really need to go back and let's talk about this some more. It's very hard to do that. It takes a very big person to do that. But believe me, if you don't, the truth will come out later, and it's going to cause a lot more damage to the trust level in your relationship, and can even destroy your relationship. A lie can destroy your relationship. So the sooner you can have the courage to say, oops, I made a mistake, and correct it, the better. As I said, these are situations where we just don't have the training and experience to tell the truth. And it's really a learning curve to learn that, and we're going to make some mistakes, and we just have to be able to forgive ourselves and each other if we're trying our best. Obviously, if someone makes a habit of lying, that's not okay, and then that's a whole different ballgame. I'm talking about where it kind of happens accidentally once or twice, and you're trying to fix that problem. Okay, there's two more things I want to tell you about communication in open relationships. The two main breakdowns in communication for an open relationship is, number one, you are asking your partner for support about something that's been difficult for you, and they believe you're asking them to change your behavior or to change the relationship agreement. My experience is this happens a lot and creates a lot of communication breakdowns. I'm going to just give a typical example. Say you've started a new outside relationship with someone else, you've started having sex with this person with your partner's consent, and now you're asking your partner for the first time to be able to stay over and spend the night with that person. This is kind of a thing that happens frequently where there's a breakdown of communication like this. You come back the next day after spending the night with your new lover, and your partner's crying, they're sullen, they're freaking out, they haven't slept, and they're yelling at you, they're very upset, and you believe that they want you to change your behavior and never do that again, never stay over again, and that you're asking for a change in the agreement. When in fact, usually the partner is only wanting you to give them support and acknowledgement because they have just done something that was really hard for them. This is the first time they've let you go and spend the night with someone else, and it was really rough for them, and they want some recognition and acknowledgement that they did something really hard, and they want you to reassure them you still love them and take care of them in some way. So I always tell people that if you find yourself in this situation where your partner is distraught, ask them what it is they need. This may seem so ridiculously obvious. It seems like a no-brainer, but we don't do it, especially if they're yelling at you and you're feeling very defensive and you're saying, well, you said it was okay. Why are you yelling at me now? You know? So it's very important to ask them, do you want me to agree not to do this again, or do you just need some support right now? And 9 times out of 10, they're just going to tell you they want you to hold them and take care of them and give them support. And sometimes they will want, that's that 1 time out of 10, they're going to want a change of some kind. Be very cautious about agreeing to that in the heat of the moment. If you agree to something just because your partner's hysterical right now, you're going to regret it. So I usually suggest ask for a postponement of that decision. Try to take care of them emotionally in that moment and ask for a postponement of the decision until you're both feeling calm, because you're going to agree to something that you're not going to be able to live up to. It's always a mistake to say yes to something that you're not going to actually be able to do. So don't make any agreements you can't keep, and that's a very one of those. That's another one of those ridiculously obvious things. Don't make any agreements you can't keep, but it happens a lot in open relationships that we accidentally will say yes to something or make an agreement that we know we're not going to keep. So last but not least, the second and most common difference in terms of communication breakdowns in an open relationship is in relation to disclosure. If you are in an open relationship, you and your partner have to discuss and decide how much do you actually want to know about what your partner's doing with a particular other person or any other person. And everybody's going to draw that line in a different place of how much disclosure they need to feel safe and to feel like there's not any big surprises coming down the pike, but how much is too much information and how much is just going to make them feel anxious and unhappy and give them nightmares with images in their head that they now can't unsee that now that you've told them something. So I usually suggest erring on the side of caution in terms of how much you tell your partner you want to know and how much information you're actually sharing. It can be very complicated and confusing because there seem to be 2 kinds of poly people out there. One group that wants to know everything because more knowledge makes them feel empowered or feel like they're in control or that they know what's happening. And then there's a whole other group that wants to know as little as possible because the more they know, the more anxious and distressed they will be. And the more they will be obsessed with painful images in their head that they just really don't want to think about. So it's important to figure out which kind of person you are. Do you need more disclosure or less? And it's kind of a trial and error thing. Most people have to try a few times and figure out, oops, no, that was too much. I didn't want to know that. And then, okay, let's go back. So, okay, well, I'm going to wrap things up.